Just when you think you've got a grasp on immigration matters, something pops up, like judges getting directly involved in enforcement. That's what we're diving into today.
Yeah, it's pretty surprising stuff. We've got two uh, very different situations that cropped up recently. Both involve judges, but in, well, quite different ways, raises some big questions.
Totally. So first up, we're going to unpack this breaking news, really, about a sitting judge arrested in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin.
And then after that, we'll shift over to New Mexico. Different case, but also involving the judiciary, a former judge and his wife facing charges there.
Right. And for this deep dive, our info comes from, a variety of sources, mostly YouTube transcripts from news reports, different outlets, different individuals covering these unfolding stories.
Yeah, so our aim really is just to lay out the facts as they've been reported. What are the actual allegations, what happened, and then maybe start thinking about the bigger picture.
Exactly. And look, whether you follow legal stuff all the time or this is kind of new, we'll break it down. No jargon, just trying to understand what's going on. Okay, so Milwaukee, let's start there. This morning, news broke about the arrest of Milwaukee County Circuit Judge Hannah Dugan.
And according to what MSNBC reported, she was actually arrested at the courthouse, the place where she works, which is pretty dramatic.
Definitely sends a message. Now, the allegations, these seem to stem, at least initially, from a tweet that was later deleted, something from Kash Patel, who used to be with the FBI, right? MSNBC reported on this.
Yeah, and that tweet alleged that Judge Dugan basically intentionally tried to mislead federal agents, threw them off track, essentially.
And the purpose, allegedly, was to stop them arresting someone named Eduardo Flores Ruiz, who was right there in her courthouse.
That's the core of it. And the charge that one source, TSPLY, mentioned is specifically obstruction of an immigration arrest operation.
Okay, obstruction. And TSPLY also noted that the initial report, that tweet, I guess, used the term illegal alien to describe Flores Ruiz.
Right, but here's an interesting detail from TSPLY. Despite whatever might have happened inside, Flores Ruiz was eventually arrested.
Oh, really? How?
Apparently, they apprehended him on foot outside the courthouse, it sounds like. So whatever the alleged obstruction attempt was, it seems it didn't ultimately prevent the arrest itself.
Huh. Okay, so he was taken into custody. But the judge is still facing potential charges. We should be careful, though, because MSNBC made a point of saying the actual federal charging documents against Judge Dugan in Wisconsin, they weren't unsealed yet. At least when they reported.
That's a critical point. So we're working off initial reports, allegations, not the final official court papers yet.
Yeah, details could definitely change. This whole Milwaukee situation, it kind of reminds me of that other incident MSNBC covered not long ago out in Boston.
Oh, yeah, with the Suffolk County DA. That was interesting, too. The DA there publicly criticized a judge over how they handled an immigration case.
And there were some pretty strong accusations flying around in that one, weren't there? Something about, like, alleged collusion between ICE and prosecutors.
Exactly. And what connects these two, potentially Boston and now Milwaukee, is this legal idea that came up in the Boston discussion, the supremacy clause.
Oh, okay. The supremacy clause. Let's unpack that a little. How does that fit in here?
Well, basically, the supremacy clause in the Constitution says federal law trumps state law when they conflict. And immigration is mostly federal, right?
Hey, federal jurisdiction.
So the argument goes that federal agencies like ICE have the authority given by federal law to make arrests. And that authority generally extends even into places like state courthouses.
I see. So even if a state judge disagrees or has concerns, the federal authority under the supremacy clause might mean ICE can still operate there.
That's the crux of the legal debate, yeah. Does the federal power override the state judge's control over their own courtroom in the specific context? It's complex.
Definitely sounds like a clash of jurisdictions, potentially. Okay, let's put a pin in Milwaukee for a moment and turn to New Mexico. This involves a former judge, right?
That's right. Joel Cano, who used to be a magistrate judge in Dugan County, and his wife, Nancy Cano. The TSPLY source reported they were arrested on Thursday.
And this wasn't just like a local police matter.
No, according to TSPLY, it's tied to an ongoing criminal investigation by HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, federal involvement again.
Okay, so what are the allegations against the Canos?
It revolves around their tenant, a guy named Christian Ortega Lopez. He's described as an alleged member of the Trenda Aragua gang. The claim is the Canos were knowingly harboring him.
Harboring him where?
In a small guest house, a casita, behind their main home in Las Cruces.
And how do they even know this guy? The source mentioned something about that.
Yeah, TSPLY said Nancy Cano apparently hired Ortega Lopez initially to do some glass installation work. That's how the connection started, supposedly.
Okay. And this Ortega Lopez, the tenant, sounds like he might have been involved in some other stuff too.
Well, yeah. TSPLY mentions social media pictures apparently showed him with several firearms, and the feds seized those guns. Ortega Lopez himself was actually arrested earlier, back in February.
What charges is he facing?
According to that source, he apparently admitted to entering the U.S. illegally in 2023, and the charge mentioned is illegal alien in possession of a firearm.
Okay. Now, what about the former judge, Joel Cano? What's his side of the story, according to the source?
TSPLY reported that Joel Cano claims he and his wife had absolutely no idea about Ortega Lopez's alleged gang ties.
That's going to be a key point in their defense, I imagine. But the charges against the Canos aren't just harboring, are they?
No, that's right. TSPLY says both Joel and Nancy Cano are also charged with tampering with evidence.
Tampering with evidence. Okay, that suggests the investigators think they tried to cover something up or interfere with the investigation somehow.
It certainly implies that, yeah. And another detail from TSPLY was the sequence of arrests. Apparently, Homeland Security focused on arresting Nancy Cano first.
Oh, and Joel Cano later.
Yeah, he was reportedly arrested later. Makes you wonder what the initial focus or evidence trail looked like.
Interesting. And this wasn't just about Ortega Lopez and the Canos, was it? The source mentioned others?
Yes. TSPLY also reported that other Venezuelan nationals were arrested as part of this too, and they're in HSI custody, so it seems like a bigger network or operation they were looking into.
Sounds like it. And one last point TSPLY made about this New Mexico case. They commented on the media coverage, or lack thereof.
Yeah, they pointed out that this story, former judge, alleged gang member, harboring evidence tampering, hasn't really blown up in the mainstream news. They even speculated a bit on why that might be.
It is curious, isn't it? What stories catch fire and which ones don't. Okay, so we've got these two specific cases. Now, let's pull back a bit. Some of the sources, particularly TSPLY, offered some broader context or reactions, didn't they?
They did. TSPLY presented a particular viewpoint, suggesting some people accuse Democrats of being, let's say, more focused on undocumented individuals than citizens. They used these judge arrests and also mentioned visits by Democratic lawmakers to detention centers as sort of examples supporting that view.
Okay, so that's one perspective offered in the source. Did they include any counterpoint to that?
Yes, they did. Within that same TSPLY report, they quoted Pom Homan. He brought up the idea that, the American public voted for stronger immigration enforcement and also highlighted the viewpoint of people waiting to immigrate legally. So presenting that contrasting angle.
Right, showing different sides of that debate. Now, TSPLY also brought up a completely separate issue, didn't they? Something about the Trump administration.
Yeah, they made a claim about a resident alien, Mahmoud Khalil. They alleged he was jailed without evidence or charge, supposedly because he attended a protest and because of things he said, his speech, basically.
And the source mentioned potential deportation consequences for him.
Yes. TSPLY stated that under U.S. law, he could potentially be deported if the Secretary of State determined his presence could have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences. They also linked him to an organization they claimed advocates for the, quote, total eradication of Western civilization. Very strong claims there.
Wow, okay. Heavy stuff. And did TSPLY offer any contrast to that particular situation?
Yes. Interestingly, they also included language describing people detained under the Trump administration generally as political prisoners. They alleged these individuals suffered from things like medical neglect, sleep deprivation, not getting enough food.
Okay, so again, presenting conflicting narratives there.
Yeah.
And we really need to stress this point, right? We're laying out these claims and viewpoints because they were in the source material we reviewed.
Absolutely. We're not endorsing any of these political takes from any side. Our job here is just to report what the sources discussed in relation to these judge arrests and the broader immigration context they were placed in.
Exactly. It's about understanding the different arguments being made out there so you, the listener, have the context.
Precisely. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. Where does this leave us?
Well, we've looked at two pretty striking cases. A sitting judge in Milwaukee arrested, accused of obstructing an immigration arrest right in her courthouse. Still developing, waiting on formal charges.
And then a former judge and his wife in New Mexico arrested as part of a bigger HSI probe, facing serious charges like harboring an alleged gang member tampering with evidence.
Yeah, and we've touched on how these events are being framed, the different political reactions, legal questions like the supremacy clause.
And the connections drawn, rightly or wrongly, by some sources to broader debates about immigration policy, enforcement priorities, and even past administration actions.
It really throws up some fundamental questions, doesn't it? Like, what is the appropriate role for a judge when federal immigration enforcement enters their domain? How do federal and state or local authorities actually work together or not work together in these situations?
Yeah, and what do these specific incidents, these arrests, tell us, if anything, about the current climate around immigration, the political pressures, the legal boundaries?
It leaves you wondering, I think, and maybe this is the final thought for you to chew on. Given all these complexities, the different laws, the intense feelings on all sides that we see reflected in the sources, what does it actually mean to uphold the rule of law when it comes to immigration today?
And maybe how do events like these arrests of judges challenge whatever understanding we thought we had?